Some of the 50 Ethiopian nationals suspected to be hostages of a human trafficking syndicate appeared in court yesterday. The group was rescued earlier this week in a home in Lombardy East, where another group of 15 foreign nationals were rescued from another home in January. Now, these are only two of the many incidents through the years. Also this week, 23 South Africans were rescued from a forced labor camp in Myanmar after being lured under false pretenses of decent work. Let's discuss this now and how the global unemployment crisis opens a window for human trafficking on the African continent with Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda, African Diaspora Global Network CEO. Good morning, Doctor. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika.
Good morning and good morning to the listeners, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, firstly, could you share your initial reactions to the recent escape of the over 50 suspected human trafficking victims?
Well, look, it's with great shock, but it's something that has become, a common practice because this is not the first one. And we know that the Ethiopian nationals have become a very huge target, and a lot of them are used in the spaza shops where they come and work, and they are also locked in some of the cases and not obviously allowed to come in. So I think something drastic really needs to take place in order to stop this cartel, because people get kidnapped, and promised jobs, and they come here and they are kept in conditions that are inhumane, and then they are coerced into, submission through the conditions that they are put in, so that even when they are put in some of these places where they are supposed to be working, they are still being, oppressed and working under, inhuman conditions as people that are real trafficked without being given freedom. So this is something very, very serious that has been going for quite some time.
How does Africa's high unemployment rate, particularly among the youth, create vulnerabilities for human traffickers and forced labor exploiters?
Well, exactly like what is happening, I think, as you can see from, countries like Ethiopia and Zimbabwe, people that are come here from Mozambique that come looking for jobs. So you can see that now, people in South Africa, because of unemployment, are also starting to trek out of South Africa because there are these promises, some of them, especially in the Middle East, where people are promised that they will work, in certain, places, and, where there are good jobs and they are promised heaven on earth, when in fact they are being taken, into slavery. And because people are unemployed and they don't need, to try and get any verification, all they think of is, as long as I can get a job, because I'm tired. I mean, some of them are graduates from university and so forth. They have tried everything and that means work. So the high unemployment levels definitely are such a driving force for people to become vulnerable and victims to this human trafficking.
And how do you think this case highlights the broader issues of human trafficking in Africa? And what are some of the key concerns that need to be addressed?
Well, this basically, I think, becomes a pivotal and an important, area to focus on. And the result of this is always going to be people, moving out, some drowning, in seas. I mean, you'll know that for a very long time, we've also had people in a number of years back that were dying in container trucks where they were kept in. And we've had also people, traveling to the UK, on the wheel of an air flight. So this actually shows these are just signals of what is problematic in our society, particularly in Africa, where, the continent is not able to produce enough jobs, and not necessarily because, it is not able to, but because our economies maybe are not really functioning in the manner that they are because of issues such as corruption, mismanagement, misgovernment, and failure to be very effective, by the government. And at the same time, the politics that is not sensitive to the people's needs, because our governments generally are more autocratic and they are more, our economies are more government driven, where the government is the one that forces things to happen the way that they want to happen because it tends to suit their needs and their corruption drive. So unless we get to a point where our governments are more of servant leadership, where they want to serve the people rather than to serve themselves, the issues of unemployment are not going to be addressed because they are only felt, by the people and not by the government officials.
Let's look at the case of the Botswana lady now facing execution in Bangladesh, Lesedi Molabisi, who was arrested for trafficking drugs. Now, this case has sparked concern about human trafficking, about forced labor, and the vulnerability of African migrants. Can you share your thoughts on this particular case and how it relates to the broader issues of human trafficking and unemployment and forced labor in Africa?
You see, and it just goes back and ties, very well with exactly what we're saying, because it's not even the first instance, but what we are looking at is, the problem of our economy is that it leaves people vulnerable, leaves young mothers. If you look at the bulk of the people that are used, or young ladies that are used in the drug, muling business, these are unsuspecting, young people that think, okay, there's an opportunity to make money, and because they might know that, okay, these are drugs, or they might have been forced, and some of them might have been abducted. But unfortunately, no one might even know what exactly has happened. But the bulk of these things and the susceptibility of people to be involved in this, it is all born out and kept out of unemployment and poor economies and the failure to satisfy, the needs, of the basic needs in the hierarchy, of the human needs of the people, so that people end up looking outside elsewhere to see if they can get that satisfaction. So people are then drawn to these things, are abducted, are then trafficked, and then forced to do these things because they just not have a choice. So now she is now facing a death sentence. But if one were to try and find out exactly how she got herself in there, we'll basically realize that she's been driven into all this by the circumstances and, the fact that she also just wanted to live a life, that is satisfied like any other person.
Now, let's also talk about the recent case of the 23 South Africans who were basically rescued from a forced labor camp in Myanmar. I mean, looking at how people are lured, what are some of the tactics that are actually used to get people to places like Myanmar? And looking at all the conversations that we are having about this, could we really plead ignorance around these issues?
Well, look, it might not be complete. Us as people, we all know, we are aware, again, about maybe some of these tactics that are taking place. But there is a lot of people that might not really know, especially, people that might not, have all the information and are desperate to get jobs. So you see, people get lured, and somebody might not just think that, okay, they are going to a forced labor camp, but they might be promised that there is, a cruise ship that's going to be taking them for 6 months. They're going to earn so much money. You will remember that, when these news break out, sometime last year, we had an issue of people and agreements, with people that were said to be going to Ukraine and the government of Malawi, getting involved. And people read those stories about some of these things that happen that tend to become, something that lures people, because people are told there is so much money that is involved. And some of these case studies are then used. And because of that, people then believe that there must be truth here. And this is my opportunity. I wouldn't miss the opportunity, because if I'm afraid, then I think that I'm going to lose out. So there is something that the people are told, and they obviously don't think that, it's something that is a lie. Because one, they are told, your transportation and everything else is going to be taken care of in some of these cases. Or they are even asked to contribute money, a certain amount of money that they are supposed to be paying. And when that money is paid, it is used, as money so that they show that it's legitimate. And they have to borrow and get savings from elsewhere to get themselves into these, forced labor camps.
So, Doctor, how are organizations such as the African Diaspora Global Network supporting victims of human trafficking and advocating for policies that prevent these crimes? And what do you think, are there any specific policies or laws that you think need to be strengthened to combat human trafficking in South Africa?
Well, look, the advocacy that we can basically do as NGOs and organizations is to try and basically, inform people, and get people to be aware of some of these problems, especially when they come up. And, also to alert, the officials where we suspect that some of these, operations are taking place. But then it is up to the officials really to take, actions. For example, look at what has been happening in the Ethiopian situation. This is something that has become, a common knowledge that something is taking place there, and it has to do with some of the works that we have seen, in these parts where people basically, work in there and they are seen to be, slaves in there. So policy, for governments that have got to come in, that must curb some of these things, and laws, is to ensure that, maybe, for example, look at, let's give a case study, for example, like, these spaza shops where, some of the people are seen to be living, in these shops where they are working, is basically to make sure that people don't live, and are not locked in spaza shops or working there. They're allowed to freely walk outside, just as a basic, so that, they cannot stay, inside there. And if this happens, it will give a little bit of freedom so that those that have been forced might even try to escape and report these cases. So if the enforcement officials that deal with these particular, businesses, can enforce the laws, health laws and environmental laws, for example, that might also help. But then when it comes also to trafficking, it becomes a problem, because some of these people are carried in container ships, and some of these people travel as ordinary, are taken as ordinary travelers, and one would not basically know. So it becomes that kind of a scheme that needs the government to crack the cracks of the syndicates themselves and have serious, sentences for the human traffickers.